So welcome to the John H. Ames Reading Series, and it's hosted by the Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. The Heritage Room is located downstairs on the third floor here at Bennett Martin. My name is Diane Wilson, and I'm curator of the Heritage Room collection. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Heritage Room if you're not familiar with it. Its mission is to preserve and celebrate works by and about Nebraska authors. And it's also supported by the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association and the Foundation for Lincoln City Libraries. They help us in many ways, and I'm really grateful for their support. They make events like this possible. The Ames Reading Series gives Nebraska authors the opportunity to share their works with our community, and today is the 227th event since it started in 1985. Yeah. Quite an accomplishment, yeah. So I have a lot of introducing to do here today. We're really excited to host these 5 accomplished women who are members of the Prairie Trout Writers Group. They've all participated in Ames Reading Series programs before, but they've never been here together. So this is really an honor. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to introduce everybody right now, and then they'll all come up to the podium and do individual readings. After their readings, I'll have some questions for them, and I think we'll have time for questions from the audience as well. So first, and I did these in alphabetical order. First is Pam Barger. She's been a professional singer for more than 50 years and has taught piano lessons for 40 years. She currently sings and plays with the Melody Wranglers and the Toasted Ponies. Pam's also a member of the Fab Tones and the band Sour Mash, both which have been inducted into the Nebraska Performing Arts Hall of Fame. Her articles have appeared in Women's Day and the American Suzuki Journal, and her work was featured in Eye of My Heart. 27 writers reveal the hidden pleasures and perils of being a grandmother. She's published poetry in Rattle, in West Branch, in the Mid-America Poetry Review, the Nebraska Poets Calendar, and in the anthology Times of Sorrow, Times of Grace. Her chapbook titled The Pinball God Let Fly was published by Pudding House Press. She's currently working on a memoir tentatively and audaciously titled Suzuki, the Buddha, and Me, One Piano Teacher's Observations. Next is Twyla Hansen. Twyla's newest poetry book is Feeding the Fire. She's a Lark Song Writers Place board member, a Humanities Nebraska writing presenter, and was Nebraska's state poet from 2013 to 2018. Some of her honors include the Nebraska Literary Heritage Award, the Nebraska Center for the Book President's Award, the Lincoln High School Distinguished Alumni Award. Her book, Rock, Tree, Bird, won the 2018 Nebraska Book Award and the Willa Literary Award. Twyla's writing has been published recently in Prairie Schooner, in South Dakota Review, also in More in Time, a tribute to Ted Kuzer, and the Nebraska Poetry Sesquicentennial Anthology, and finally in the Academy of American Poets. Mary Pfeiffer graduated in cultural anthropology from the University of California at Berkeley in 1969, and she received her PhD from the University of Nebraska in clinical psychology in 1977. Mary was a Rockefeller Scholar in residence at Bellagio and has received 2 American Psychological Association presidential citations, one of which she returned to protest psychologists' involvement in enhanced interrogations at Guantanamo. Mary is the author of 12 books, including Reviving Ophelia, The Green Boat, and A Life in Light. Marge Sizer is a founding member of Lark Song Writers Place, and the author of 8 volumes of poetry. Her honors include the High Plains Book Award, an Academy of American Poets Prize, the Vreelands Award, the Nebraska Literary Heritage Award, the Mildred Bennett Award for Exceptional Literary Contributions, the Willa Award, and 4 Nebraska Book Awards. Marge is co-editor of 2 anthologies. One is titled Times of Sorrow, Times of Grace, and the other is titled Road Trip, Conversations with Writers. Her novel in poems, called Losing the Ring in the River, served as the basis for Bridget Amos's play of that same title. It was produced in 2018 by the Angels Theater Company at the Johnny Carson Theater in Lincoln. In his column, American Life and Poetry, Ted Kuser has said that no contemporary poet is better at writing about love than Marge Sizer. Her poems can be found at poetryfoundation.org and on her website, poetmarge.com. So finally, our last author that I'm mentioning is Karen Geddert Shoemaker. She's the author of Night Sounds and Other Stories, and the novel The Meaning of Names, which was selected for the Community Read Program's One Book, One Nebraska in 2016, and the Omaha Public Library's Omaha Reads in 2014. Awards for her writing include a Nebraska Press Association Award for feature writing, 2 Independent Artist Fellowship Awards from the Nebraska Arts Council, and a Nebraska Book Award for short fiction. Karen's work has been published in a variety of newspapers and journals, including the New York Times, the London Independent, Prairie Schooner, and the South Dakota Review, and also anthologized in A Different Plane, Contemporary Nebraska Fiction Writers, in Times of Sorrow, Times of Grace, and Nebraska Presence, an anthology of poetry. Karen's the founder and director of Lark Songwriters Place, a literary nonprofit center in Lincoln, Nebraska. That was a lot of introducing because these women are so accomplished. So our first reader is going to be Pam Barger.
Wow, I didn't know we were that good. How's that? Thank you to Diane Wilson, to the sound people, to the Ames people, to everybody for coming, and my dear friends. Before I read this, I wanted to define one term, because I'm going to be writing from my writing about teaching piano, and I describe a piece of music called an intermezzo, and so the definition is a short piece of music for a solo instrument. It used to go in between things, but it's just a generic term for piece. And this is a chapter in it, and it's called Chloe, age 6, asks what music is for. When cellist Pablo Casals was asked why he continued to practice 3 hours a day at the age of 90, he replied, "I think I'm making progress." I admired this quote when I was young, but I treasure it now that I'm approaching my 7th decade. I too have this notion that I'm making progress, and this astounds me. Lately, I've been preparing one of my all-time favorite pieces, Brahms' Intermezzo, Opus 118, number 2, to play for my upcoming students' recital. I first learned it in college and have resurrected it every 5 years or so to teach it once, yay Emily, and to play it for various occasions, including a grown-up student's wedding and a pair of funerals. These days, I've been hearing Professor Ravnan's voice circa 1987 in my inner ear, watching his hand conduct me. Yada dum, yada dum. This time, more than last time and the time before, and way more than the first time, I think I get it. That's what Brahms meant. Duh. How could I have missed it? Go to there, now to there. Of course, my long-suffering husband, who hears me play for hours on end, hasn't noticed the change this epiphany has made in my playing. It's virtually unmeasurable in terms of decibels and microseconds. But in terms of my own perception, it's like the difference between fire and firefly. Given a choice between a month of gourmet meals and this musical growth, I'd choose the latter anytime. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that this is what keeps me going. When I'm deep into music I love, it works on me too, riding the slipstream of my mind continuously, regardless of my conscious awareness. A soundtrack for dishwasher emptying, weed pulling, and even meditation. Often when I'm walking, the music spinning itself out in relation to my footfalls, discrepancies between my playing and how I should be playing come to the fore. It's no surprise that my Brahms epiphany occurred at Roper Park, crystalline as a cardinal's call or a tender stem breaking through the earth's crust. By learning, practicing, and memorizing the piece thoroughly, I'd prepared the soil, so to speak, to nurture the seed of the music itself. There was grace in my effort, of course, but the true miracle was the seed, container of all information needed for Brahms's ideas to sprout, grow, and flower, even many generations later. My new understanding encompassed phrasing, harmony, and rhythmic pulse, but I didn't get there by thinking about phrasing, harmony, and rhythmic pulse. Let me try that again. Arrive is as dangerous a word as thinking is when it comes to trying to understand a work of genius. I'd thought I'd understood this intermezzo before. Next time, I'll be dismayed over what I'm missing now. The wonder is that in art, there is no such thing as a point of arrival. Hallelujah. I might try to explain my epiphany by saying that the music's pulse has become less like knots on a string and more like ocean waves, the beginning of one pulse contained within the previous one. And then I could switch metaphors and describe it as a feather set aloft on wind currents, never quite coming to rest until the final chord has died away. Waves, feathers, seeds. If I could tell you what it meant, said ballerina Isadora Duncan, there would be no point in dancing it. Here's the thing. Like Casals, only on my own small scale level, I'm still making progress. My hands don't work as well as they once did, but to my delight, my understanding of music itself continues to deepen, and I'm more enraptured than ever. I feel so grateful that music calls me, and grateful that I have the wherewithal to answer. I could say yes every day for the rest of my life and never come close to exhausting its riches. Brahms put more into those 4 pages than I'll ever discover, and that one piece, of course, is a tiny fraction of the works of genius waiting on my music shelves. I'll never grow tired of attempting to manifest what minds like Brahms's encoded for me, for my students, for anyone who cares to engage with him. But, Chloe asks, what's it for? If I'm alleviating world suffering by exploring music, the results probably won't show for lifetimes. Meanwhile, though, I'm not hurting anybody when I'm simultaneously engaged and peaceful. I honestly believe that music helps me grow my soul. From there, perhaps I can do, and maybe have done, some measure of good. This is what I want for my students, whether through music or any other vehicle. Our world's best hope, I suspect, lies in the peace and depth waiting to be awakened and cultivated like Brahms' seeds in all of us.
Thank you, Pam. That was lovely. And thank you, Diane, for organizing this. And by the way, Diane is retiring in June, so thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I want to read a poem that I wrote after we named this group, Prairie Trout. And you may not see the prairie trout in it. It's kind of abstract, but I'll just read it anyway. And this book is out of print, so if you want a copy of it, you can email me or something. Prairie trout. It's been said that they once lived widespread throughout the Great Plains, roamed freely in the cold, clean, tall grass, their skin hues blending with the landscape's subtlety, weaving like a whisper of wind. In the early days, children could be seen chasing them, watching in the distance for a ripple, then off among the browns, golds, and reds, hoping for a glimpse of elusive freckle, for a brush of delicate dorsal fin. Today, they're as rare as the blue moon. Perhaps it's a loss of habitat, clarity or light, the sheer solitude of unclosing eyes, of landed gills. Just imagine a school of rainbow swishing between insect and mammal, beneath hawk and swallow and meadowlark, beneath sun and moon and sun, wild and unscaled. Just imagine. Thank you. That describes us, right? Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, these are my besties right here. We've been doing this for a long time, and we'll get into that question and answer, but it just turns out we all respect each other so much, and so thank you. The second poem I want to read is from Rock Tree Bird, and it actually, the prairie trout was in this poem. We met Mary's agent, former agent from New York City, out there. She came to see Mary, and then she wanted to go to the prairie. She loves the prairie, so anyway, we were all out there, and so you're in this poem. After the prairie burn. The hillsides are black, except for the trails on which I hike, past the building, across the bridge, above a pond, where a dozen Canada geese land away from me around a bend. Beyond the thicket, their honks and flaps like a teenage fun swim. Less than a week after the prairie burn, the shoots of regrowth rise from roots that reach deep. The erratic rocks now exposed dot the hills. Wetland cattails singed, sumac shoots charred, the linger of fire and smoke waft up. A controlled burn designed to clear out invaders, restore flora and fauna to the tall grass which once dominated this region, where fires once occurred naturally by lightning or set deliberately by natives, but now we must assist. I walk and recall the time 6 women lay at burn's edge in the cushion of grass, the fire crew firing their final lines toward a small forest where the flames would sputter out, tamping hot spots. When one read the story of her husband's death, still fresh in her voice, the cremation, the Shiva, and tears, as we watched a hawk dive into the smoke for anything alive. And afterward, there was nothing more to say. We were simply present in silence in that moment, here, under morning clouds that were about to clear. Thank you. Let's see. Okay. This one's called Morning. Before sunrise, the low hoots of the horned owl seep into my sleep-still ears, the house tight, the heat pump purring, the white of last night's snow, a cold blanket above the backyard thick with leaves. Where yesterday I watched a lone thrasher dig and scatter, stranger to this season, its brown speckled breast and long tail harking early summer, but not yet. I pull up the blanket, blue under my chin, and listen. First one owl, and then a second, calling to each other in the dim, cold air, and the one next to me, his rhythmic breaths and riffles, and know in my bones at 6:30 he will rise and turn on the coffee, shuffle toward the expectant eyes and upturned tails of the cats, calling him for their breakfast. The scene, the scent of dark brew he will bring to me each morning, a vow, renewed each day, sacred and strong on the tongue. Thank you. And now I will read from Feeding the Fire. And the first one is called Salt Creek Early Morning. I used to take a walk every morning at 6:30. I say used to because I don't do that anymore. I have coffee first. Suddenly, I invade a sanctuary. Beneath the footbridge, two, then four dark-hued ducks lift and flap off the creek. I depart the cozy bed, I departed the cozy bed, the heated house, to greet daybreak, my own method. Flat water mirroring sky, all else remaining colorless. Sandbars, snags, banks, thick with wild grass. They move from harm in easy distance, mates perhaps, pintails maybe, lighting into perfect circle pairs, radiating over the shallows. Much of this day I'll get paid to care about other business, offering my small twigs. Yet even indoors I'll glance out over clean treetops, sense the sun over my desk, detect the echo of small voices, wing-like, and later, in our warm nest, describing that walk in the cold, the pairs of ducks, their quiet dash, the instinct we all return to. Thank you. So I read a love poem to my late husband that brought me the coffee in the morning, but this is a love poem to my new partner, Bryce, who is sitting right there. So it's called So Easy in Fall. So easy in fall to fall in love of wind, the winds of fall, the blousy scents, warm, cool, in between, warm and cool battle, the season's whims. On a whim outing, walk with me on the prairie, walk the warm hilltops, step into the cool ravines. Before us, the native grass turns red, gold, purple. The late season forbs bend their heads. Wind and clouds stir. Birds scurr the sky. The calls and responses from somewhere close. Come lie with me, dear, where deer have rested. On thatch, rest your bones. We are here. Close your eyes. Breathe the soil, the drought, the rain, the green, the brown. Overhead seas wave. That other world can wait. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's nice to look out and see so many people that I like and have known a long time. I'm going to read a short chapter from this book, A Life in Light. It's my latest memoir, and it's very much preoccupied with my love of light and my use of light to rescue me when I'm low and struggling. So this chapter, I didn't have much trouble choosing this chapter to read because the name of the chapter is The Library. And I thought, well, what better place to read a chapter about a library than right here? The one thing you might want to know is I was fourth grade when we moved to Beaver City, Nebraska, a town about 400 people out on the Colorado border, Furnace County. And I'd had quite a bit of moving around, living with one parent or the other in multiple moves. And Beaver City was really the first town that we settled into, bought a house. I got to know some of the people in the city pretty quickly. But anyway, this particular chapter is the library. From Beaver City, before Beaver City, I had never been inside a library. In my grandmother's town of Flagler, I visited the bookmobile that came through town every Friday evening. We inched through the narrow little van to the two shelves that contained children's reading, and grandmother helped me select a few books to enjoy during my visit. Beaver City was large enough to have a luxury that Dorchester didn't, a small brick library located just off the town square. In 5 minutes, I could bike it to it from my home. The library was solemn and quiet with only soft footsteps and the occasional whisper. A bright white lamp lit the librarian's desk, and in each aisle, a bare light bulb emitted just enough light to read the book titles. Globe lamps on the reading tables spill circly lemons of light. Everything about the library seemed holy. The dim lighting, the silence, the smells of leather, floor wax, and old paper. Its sanctified stations were clearly defined. Card catalogs crowned two wooden stands. Visitors stood before them and leafed through soft, faded cards, interspersed with a few new fresh ones that signaled a new book or a popular older one. For example, Pearl S. Buck, The Good Earth, had a new card almost every other week, since many of the women in our town checked it out as soon as it returned to the shelves. The heavy wooden tables allowed us to sit side by side with our fellow citizens. The stacks arranged by the duodecimal system made it easy to walk down the aisles, reading titles, pulling out books, and carrying them to the table for further perusal. It was possible to spend half a day in the library examining books or reading the newspapers from Omaha, Kansas City, and Denver. In a town with no television and few places to go, many people were readers, and the library could be very busy on a rainy afternoon. My favorite ritual was checking out books. The library card in its town folder at the back of the book allowed me to see who else had read the book and how often it had been checked out since its purchase. I could examine everyone's signatures and then add my own happy schoolgirl writing to the end of the card. The librarian, Mrs. Schaefer, was a small, tidy person who seemed old to me, although most likely she was about 45. She knew everyone who came into the library and was unfailingly polite and professional. Sometimes she would comment on the size of my book pile, always large, or suggest something I might like, or whisper if I had enjoyed a book. When I left, she would stamp a due date beside my name on the cards and smile as she said, "Come back, Mary, soon. I know you will." Sure. Thank you. I would walk into the bright sunlight or the gray skies and rain with a bundle of riches in my arms that I could hardly wait to enjoy. My first year in town, I read every interesting book in the children's section. I was outraged at the treatment of Black Beauty, and I wanted a Mustang like my friend Flicka. My favorite novels were Little Women, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and Sarah Crewe, now called The Little Princess. At that time, many children's books taught us to aspire toward heroism. I was enthralled by how people coped with adversity and grew up to be heroes. I read about Helen Keller, Tom Dooley, Eleanor Roosevelt, Madame Curie, and Dr. Albert Schweitzer. I read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington and a biography of George Washington Carver, the first books that educated me about race. These books reinforced the teachings of my mother, aunts, and grandmother, which were that good people act on behalf of others. I was inspired by Death Be Not Proud by John Gunther, about the death of his brave son who as a child developed cancer. Gunther also wrote many books with titles such as Inside Africa or Inside Europe. He wanted Americans to understand the world from the point of view of faraway peoples. I loved these guides. I also read A Child's Geography of the World, A Child's History of the Art, and A Child's History of the World. My Aunt Margaret told me that many people only know their friends and neighbors, but that readers are able to experience the lives of thousands of people from all times and places. I crave that experience of knowing how other people felt, thought, and behaved. Reading lit a path in my future. I was constructing an identity beyond the bounds of family, and I was beginning to understand how big and complicated and amazing the world truly was. I began playing what I called the globe game. I would spin our globe around with my eyes closed and put my finger on it somewhere before I opened them. Excuse me. Then I would imagine myself in whatever spot my finger had landed. I tried to see the trees, sky, birds, and water. I imagined the children's clothing and toys and the foods. I listened for the tinker of bells or the calls of grown-ups at work. I yearned to visit every part of the world when I grew up. With the librarian's guidance, I read novels by Mark Twain and Charles Dickens and many others, including Pride and Prejudice, War and Peace, and Les Miserables. These books helped me inhabit worlds very different from my own and increase my sense of the wide range of human experience. I came to understand that many people suffered as children. I wasn't alone, but part of a community of sufferers that included most of the human race. That realization was oddly comforting. Over time, the library became my church, and reading became my way of understanding the world. I built myself from books. Reading offered me hope, soothed me in difficult moments, and gave me a sense of the immense complexity of the human spirit. There are all kinds of light in the world, from the sky during moments of awe and bliss, and from those lemony circles on the tables of the Beaver City Library. Thank you.
I just love that piece, Mary. Don't you? Yeah, yeah. And grateful for this library. Thank you and thank you to each one of you for being here in the seats today. Let me tell you about the library where I was a kid. We didn't have one. Naper, Nebraska, up near the Kippaha and the Niobrara. But what I had was a dittoed sheaf stapled together, titles of books. And I would write a letter to the librarian in Lincoln, Nebraska, and list some books, and they would arrive in a package, and then I sent them back. I think I remember it was 5 cents a pound to send those books back. And, oh man, you know, it was wonderful. So I thought I would read a poem that was written in the Prairie Trout group. Karen and Pam and I would get together to write at a cafe. We'd have something to eat, the mill, and then we would get out our notebooks and write. So, and one way to start writing is to make a list. So I made a list of the clothes in my closet, you know. And that list then turned into a list of the coats that I had sent to my mother. Living up there on the Niobrara and the Kippaha, and in the winter, she was often cold. And so I made that list. The poem's called Keeping My Mother Warm. And then I read it to Pam and Karen. That's what we would do, right? We would eat, write, and read to each other, probably eat again. Keeping my mother warm. I gave her a down shirt, rib knit collar, snaps, forest green. She said she wears it in the house. I gave a jacket, royal blue, zipper, hood, premium northern goose down. When she scrubbed makeup off the collar, she bleached the color out. But she said she doesn't mind. I gave a black cotton sweater, a jillion red roses embroidered on the front, heavy as chain mail. Elastic in the cuffs. She said she washed it, dried it in the dryer. Said it held up pretty well. I gave a sleek wool blend, gray with white cables. Perhaps it flaps on her wash line even now. Maybe it tumbles, cuffs over crew neck in her dryer. I should make her a quilt for the quilt maker. Last night I slept under a quilt she sewed, gorgeous prairie, sea of many colors, red velvet triangles, yellow satin trapezoids, purple silk parallelograms, dark shining rhombuses, her feather stitch holding every crazy thing together. Thanks, Mom, for that beauty. May your loneliness go south for the winter. May your old friends bring you cake. May you beat them at pitch, pinochle, hearts, and gossip. May the mail arrive early with gifts. May hummingbirds remember where all your windows are. May your feet be warm as waffles, warm as buckwheat cakes, warm as sweethearts. May your fingers limber and flex above any patch you ever want. May all your pies be chocolate. Love me, love me, love me, love me. Ooh, I didn't know. I didn't know that was going to choke me up. You know, your head goes, I'm fine, but your throat knows this is kind of deep or something, whatever the right word is for that. So, okay. I'll read bad news, good news. My husband, Don, is alive and well and doing very well, but this is, yeah. But this is a poem about the day his doctor told him he had bladder cancer. And I was with a group of women. We were camping out far from Lincoln, and he texted to tell me that news. And at the end of this poem turns toward nature which of course, it's a solace, isn't it? It's a comfort. Bad news, good news. I was at a camp in the country. You were home in the city, and bad news had come to you. You texted me as I sat with women around a campfire. It had been a test you and I hadn't taken seriously, hadn't worried about. You texted the bad news word, cancer. I read it in that circle around the fire. There was singing and laughter to my right and left, and there was that word on the screen. I tried to text back, but as often happened in that country, my reply would not send. Technology is like that, isn't it? So I went to higher ground. I stood on a hill above the river and sent you the most beautiful words I could manage. Put them together, each following each. Under Ursa Major, Polaris, Cassiopeia, a space station flashing, I said what had been said many times, important times, foolish times. Those words soft-bodied humans say when the news is bad. The I love you we wrap around our need and hurl at the cosmos. Take this, you heartless nothing and everything. Take this. I chose words to fling into the dark toward you. While the gray-robed coyote came out of hiding, and the badger wandered the unlit hill, and the lark rested herself in the grasses, I sent the most necessary syllables we have. After all this time, the ones we want to hear. I said home. I said love. I said tomorrow. Boy, you really appreciate a microphone because you don't have to work so hard. Well, this is the title poem, The Track the Whales Make, my new and selected, and it's named after, Don and I were on one of those whale watching boats, and when the whale dives, for a minute, there's this big circle on the surface of the water. I call that the track the whales make. And so it's about a love that, you really want to last and last. And I'll end with this. The track the whales make. You and I on the boat notice the track the whales make. The huge ring their diving draws for a moment on the surface of the water. I want to believe when we can no longer walk across a room for a hug, can no longer step toward the arms of the other, there will be this, some delicate trace that stays. And below, out of sight, dark mammoth shadow, flick of flipper, body of delight, diving deep.
So somebody in the back row, Randy, if you can't hear me, will you do some sort of high sign that I'm supposed to talk louder? Thank you. Thank you, Diane, for putting this together. And I have to admit that doing it in alphabetical order sounded better before this all started. So I'm a little shaken. But thank you, guys. I chose some poems that is about my siblings, or one of my siblings. And I did that because I wanted to show something about how my first writing supporters, my siblings, built a room in my heart that made it possible for the Trout to walk into. And so I'm so grateful to my siblings. I'm grateful to all my writers groups, especially the Prairie Trout, who I would not be who I am without them. So I'm reading some poems. I'm sorry, they're sad. They're three connected poems about the death of my brother. And Marge made it possible for, it's okay if my throat tightens up, but I'm hoping I will get through this without tears. So, but I chose them also because they were written at Lark Song events. The founder, the writer's place, doing the things that people who come to Lark Song are doing is helping me be a writer. And part of this is processing some griefs that I have. So these were written in, one of them in Barbara Schmidt's class, one of them in Grace Bauer's class, and all of them polished in the writers groups that I belong to there at Lark Song. So the first one, these are in honor of my brother Dwayne, who died in 2016. The year of awful dying. You first noticed the problem as a shifting beneath your feet, a rocking boat you walked on, even when you were lying still. You thought at first it was a trick your wife played on you, petty revenge for all those years you chose, she insisted, to sail away on a river of highways, never seeing how much you longed for the shore. Some days the entire horizon pitched side to side and took you with it. You took to cursing anyone near, telling them to make it stop, to settle it down, goddammit. Your voice turned gruff between howling tears, gone the tenderness. We hardly knew you. Our stalwart gone lurching into something like the future. Toward the end, just before the final days, your big hands clawed for us, beseeching whispers, whirlpools of indecipherable words, drowning man, alone on a bed, drenched in sweat, mouth open, so much left unsaid. The second, these two are Witness 1 and Witness 2, so it's one long poem with two parts. Witness 1, loud enough, Randy? Witness 1. He saw this country through the windshield of a semi with a load of cattle on the trailer behind. His last 3 voice messages start with the same question. He once told me he believed there were things in this world that were meant to be seen, and it was his job to see them. Sometimes they were good things, sometimes not. Once it was a man fixing fence beside a long stretch of interstate somewhere in Montana. 2 kids sitting on the tailgate of an old Ford pickup. A speeding car careened off the road just a few feet from the back of Dwayne's loaded trailer, spun in circles that took the man, missed the kids. He saw all that through the rearview mirror doing 85. He slowed down, but at that speed with 25 tons of live animals on board, he was a mile away before he got stopped. By then, others were on the scene. He could see them running toward something he knew none of them wanted to see. He stood 6'3" and claimed he weighed 185. He had slap a belly used to truck stop diners and long hours on the road and laugh. Blue eyes sparkling in a face soft and round as a teddy bear's. He loved the boom, boom, boom of the 4th of July. The kids, all of them, no matter who they belonged to, loved grilling dogs and broccoli, loved homemade ice cream as long as someone else did the cranking, and always a stock tank full of ice and pop because that's what we had when we were kids. When young, he got pushed around and bullied by people who should not have done that, who should have known better, who should have protected the boy he was. He kept his curly, dark brown hair close cropped. It had time to grow gray, but not enough time. Never enough time. He never forgot about the man beside the road in Montana. Whenever he called, he didn't say hello. He asked, "Are you mad at me?" When his photo, the one we used for the obituary, comes up on the rotation of ever-shifting photos on my computer screen, the muscles of my throat tighten so abruptly I have to cough before I can breathe again. Sometimes I listen to his last 3 messages, whisper into the silence at the end, "Yes, yes I am, but not at you." Witness 2. He once told me he thought death would be a kind of emptying. Like, through your feet, he said. A stopper would come unstopped, and life, whatever that was, would drain from you. He used to love to tell me about the day Mom and Dad brought me home from the hospital, how excited he was, nose pressed to the window, palm prints on the glass, Mom with the bundle of me in her arms. No one else, not even my mother, remembered that day. When he died, I stood outside his door, waiting for the nurses to clear again the phlegm from his throat, to let him breathe just a little longer. We had been listening to the rattle for more days and nights than seemed humanly possible. Suddenly, something like a string attached somewhere deep inside me to somewhere deep inside him went taut, and I pressed my sweaty palms against that big door to find nurses leaning over the bundle of what was left of him. I ran, walked, floated to his bedside, witnessed the pink of his life just as he had imagined, drain down in a straight line, forehead to cheeks to chin, to disappear into the neckline of his cotton gown, as if he were being emptied, as if he had become, at last, unstopped. Thank you.
Well, thank you to everyone. My heart's really full having just listened to the 5 of you. So this is a wonderful hour we've had. I'm going to ask a question quickly. When we do our panel discussion, should we still use the microphones? So just so you know, this is all being recorded and it'll be on YouTube, so we'll be able to hear it all. So I'm handing a mic to Mary to pass back and forth. It's already on, so we don't have to do anything. I have several questions, and I guess the first one is just, how did Prairie Trout get started? And where did this name come from? I'll put those 2 together.
Well, actually, I think Twyla and I started Prairie Trout. We were in a Bill Clevcorn class together and decided we'd like a writers group. And Twyla, I believe you knew Marge and invited her into it. And I knew Pam and invited her into it. And this was about 1985. So we've been together 23 plus 15, whatever that is. And then Karen came in shortly after. And we had different members come and go for a while. But once we got this particular group, we liked it just the way it was. The name, one thing, by the way, about a writers group is you really can't have more than 5 people, because by the time people have a chance to read and then the group has to discuss their writing, if you have more people, what it tends to mean is everybody gets less attention than they need to their work. Prairie Trout came from an idea I had, which was the way to create a beautiful name was to smash together 2 beautiful nouns. So I was really into fishing at that point, and I recommended Prairie Trout. I recommended Catfish Moon. I probably had another fish name in there. But we lighted on Prairie Trout. So it's been a good, I think it's been a good name. Do you want to add anything, Twyla, to the group starting?
I don't think that microphone's not working.
Well, it's working on YouTube.
Okay. It's not for us.
Okay, so I'll just stand here and talk loud, right? Okay. Well, we rejected a couple of names, like Prairie Rose or, Wildflowers or something, I mean, it was too saccharine, right? But. Oh, recording using the mic, sorry. We rejected Prairie Rose, and we probably rejected something that Pam the biting sows. Nice try, Pam. But anyway, that's how the name came about.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything?
Well, I remember it was in my sunroom, and how good it felt when we landed on that name. It was right.
Okay, I've got another question then. You've kind of alluded a little bit to how a writing group works, but I'm really mystified by this because I'm not a writer. I know that you mentioned some of you meeting like at the mill and eating and then reading, but tell me, how does a writing group work?
Well, that's two distinct parts. Was that like a subgroup of us would agree to get together and write at the mill. We didn't write on the same topic. We were just side-by-side industry, I called it. But then this other thing is the critiquing. Somebody else can talk about that.
I think over time, the word critique is not really salient. I think we read for one another and find the things we like, and we are careful not to do anything that would make somebody want to give up, or, I think it reminds me of teaching piano, that you work with the good stuff and keep going, and man, what has happened. I don't think any of us had published much, and I by far have published the least, but what a group. We were young women with raising kids largely at the time, and that's where it went. We meet once a month, we try to, and when Marge is in Arizona in the winter now, she comes by Zoom, and everybody brings something and takes a turn reading, and we all comment, and then we pass on, and then we go out to lunch.
Always the eating, you notice about that. I think we serve, for the most part, our monthly writers group, we serve as kind of a fourth wall to find out what we're doing alone by either generatively together in a group or by ourselves in our lonely garret. We come to the group to hear it out loud and hear back what it sounds like to the others. So it's not critique, it's witnessing, not to borrow my own poem's phrase, but it is, we witness and listen and reflect back what we hear. And so that's really how I think it works for us. So.
Okay. Anybody else want to add?
I'll just say one word. We were started before, Mary became famous. I'll just say that. I mean, New York Times bestseller, come on, But I remember that it was before that. So what year was that?
About that. Yeah. When I had an agent when the group started, and I'd written a book called Hunger Pains about eating disorders in the late 80s that we couldn't find a publisher for. I drove around with a box of books in my trunk and gave workshops on eating disorders to teachers and mental health professionals, but we couldn't find a New York publisher. But when we started our writers group, I didn't have another book really in mind. I had an idea, and I told this group, I'm going to call my new book The Social, Developmental, and cognitive factors involved in adolescent girls. And I thought it was pretty good, and the poets and just kind of groan, like, oh man, you'll never get that published, And so in one day, I forget, I think it was Marge that said, well, think about Shakespeare. And I immediately thought about Ophelia. And then we all kind of kicked around what would the verb be if we go with Ophelia. And it's funny because when I sent that book to New York, they liked the proposal, but they go, well, we're going to have to get another title. So they had their marketing team kick around other titles. And eventually somebody got back to me and said, we couldn't find a better title for that book. So that's why I got to keep that title. And I would never have been able to sell that book without the Trout helping me, not only with the title, but I came at writing as a social scientist. And I was very humble about my writing ability, except to write a paper in college. And this group was so full of energy and love of words and love of metaphor and love of story that I really felt like really all the years I've been with the Trout, I've been in a class. And it's just been tremendously helpful for me to be with 4 friends who share a love of language, who share a love of books, who are very excited about having a voice in the culture. It's just been wonderful for me to have that as a part of my life. And even at that time, just to know women my age who were interested in writing and had the same brazen attitude I did that maybe I could do it,
Well, this leads to the next question that I think we talked about. Everybody would really like to address this. What has this group meant to you?
Oh, wait. Oh, it's been fun. I don't think I would be the writer that I am. And I think it had to do with we all, by being in this group, we not only had to take ourselves seriously, we took each other seriously. And the world does not take us seriously when you're not published, when you're starting out. Nobody takes you seriously. But we took each other seriously, and we kept driving each other to get better at whatever it was we were doing. So for me, this group turned me into a writer. I had been writing. I'd already had a master's thesis. I mean, I was on the edge of getting a book out. So, I was already writing, but this group really turned me into somebody who took myself seriously. And because of that, I got to do all this writing life that I'm doing. So I am who I am because of these 4.
Well, Karen, that's pretty much what I prepared to say.
I know, I read your notes.
Yeah, and especially, my girls were little, and I went to college late. Being taken seriously by women who are really smart and with very big hearts and very perceptive, old souls. It's not just writing; it's who I am. And I have other dear friends as well, but it's you guys mean a whole lot to me.
Well, I know that people in writing groups, there are a lot of you in the room who are in writing groups, and it's great to be in more than one, isn't it? But you would probably agree with me that one of the best things about a writing group is deadlines. The group is going to meet tomorrow, and so this thing that you're not really satisfied with it, so you revise it, you get it ready for someone else's ear. That's a very valuable thing. And then another thing about it is the encouragement. I've been in groups too, and maybe you have, where I find I was writing less. So that's the real test. If you are writing more because of the encouragement and because of the deadlines.
Okay, so I don't know what I'll say that's different, but I think there's a level of trust. I mean, that if you take something to a group and you're not sure about a poem, it's great to read it out loud, and you can tell if something's working or not, but the group will help you out with that. I mean, did you mean this, or do you really want to say that? There's word choices to be made, especially in poetry. But I think we help each other out a lot with that when we read our new stuff out loud. And the trust that's between us. We know we're not going to clobber each other. or beat each other up for saying something stupid. What else?
Well, you know, one thing I think is just the frequent opportunity to get very high level feedback about every piece of writing. So we essentially all have 4 editors who are willing to give us their best thoughts about everything we write. And that's been very important. Also, we have taught each other, there's the writing and then there's the publishing. And we have taught each other the publishing business to a certain extent. And I mean, I have no doubt if I had not been in a writers group, I wouldn't have published over and over the way I have, because it just takes, my editor Jane in New York said one time, for a book to be a bestseller, to be a big success, everything has to go right. One thing doesn't go right, it's not going to be a big success. And I think probably the original important thing that went right for me is landing in this particular writers group. Whereas with women, I was very age mates, interested in the same things, very capable of giving constructive feedback, eager to help, eager to learn. And I don't know how many of us would have a writing career now if we hadn't been. We're very lucky we found each other. But that doesn't mean that most people who want to write couldn't be equally lucky. I mean, if you know people you like, that you respect their writing ability, this can happen really for anyone, I believe. So the longevity really helps. We've been together since we were raising young kids, you know. So.
One more question from me. So I'm a librarian, and I just have to ask this question, which is, how has being a writer impacted your reading life? And I have to give credit to Pat Leach for this question.
Well, the advice of one of my writing teachers said to read like a thief. So find something you can use. And that's not always what I read for, but reading always helps my writing, because that's how I start writing, is to read first. It doesn't have to be other poetry. It can be the New Yorker, you know, not the jokes, okay, so, but, you know, maybe a story or something. But anyway, as that's what I've always done, is read first. And sometimes you can use words that you find. That's always nice.
And the jokes, right? The jokes.
I've been startled over time recently I reread some books I loved as a little kid to give them to a little kid. And I see my writing in there. And so in the way that I described in my essay that I wrote about the music kind of steeps while you're not thinking, I think the more you read and the more you hear reading, it's some of it's subconscious, but sometimes I'll, like another friend said, you think a lot when you read. She said, I just get lost in the book, but I do have a certain part of me that's thinking, you know, I wouldn't have done it that way, or I think that's really cool, or I mean, I think it gives you another layer when you're reading as a writer.
My first creative writing teacher, fiction writing teacher, was Ron Hansen. And I remember one of the best pieces of advice he gave was for fiction writers to read poetry before you sit down to write fiction. And that is to pay attention to the words, pay attention to rhythm. It's not just the story. And that piece of advice really changed I started reading poetry more than, I didn't read a lot of poetry before that, but then once you start reading it, you start liking it, I discovered. And, but I think that's it, that it makes me attuned to words in new ways. I don't necessarily steal, but I don't necessarily not steal. So
Bill Clefcorn said, good writers borrow, great writers steal.
Well, I guess we have time. Do we have time for a couple questions if anybody in the audience has a question? Any questions?
I just had one question for the audience. How many writers are out here in the audience today?
Oh, quite a few writers.
When you write, which is your favorite form to write? Do you write with a pencil or do you get on the keyboard?
That question was, I'm just saying this so that everybody will be able to hear it on YouTube. The way you write, with a pencil or on the computer, what's your favorite way to write?
Well, for years I wrote with a pencil, and I was a very slow transitioner to the computer. I loved writing by hand, but I now use a word processor. Yeah. One thing about a word processor, it's extremely easy to store material, and if you're writing a lot, it's very handy for an organizational system.
Yeah, I started out filling up cheap notebooks. Some of my friends, some of our friends, use that acid-free paper. Oh, do you guys do that? And but you know, then you have them in a closet somewhere full, and oh dear, you know, what do you do with all that stuff? So usually I don't usually go back, but occasionally I have these notebooks and I've been going through them. But I remember in the 80s, I think it was, first laptops came out. They were huge and heavy. And a writer from Texas, and now his name slips my mind, but he was traveling. He was a Vietnam veteran and had written poetry. And he was one of the better poets out there that were writing about this stuff. And he said, well, I used to write in a notebook, but I have this laptop, so I just open it up and see what happens. And a lot of good things really happen in his laptop, so that's what I do now.
Well, I have to write it by hand in a regular spiral-bound notebook, scribble it, because the body has to be into it for me. And then I have to get to the keyboard, to the computer, and get it on the screen, print it out, and then I work on it. So it's kind of both. But first it has to be by hand. I don't know, there's something about the body being in it. And I have written some things where I just go to the computer first and write. And it's in my head then, and it's Faulknerian, and it's false, and it's, doesn't work for me. So I write it out first, and then I have to get it printed out so that I can work on it.
I wonder what would happen if I went back to writing by hand. I had to laugh when Mary said having it on the computer makes it organized. Because there's I bet there's 20 different copies of slightly different, the thing I read today, for example, and some of it's under writing, some of it's under memoir, some of it's under April 2023. So it's not helped me be organized. But the setting, when you talk about the body, that for me, I have a desk overlooking my backyard, which has commons area behind it. So if I'm indoors, I'm in the sun and I can see outside. And in the summer, I call my patio my office. And thank God for laptops, because it makes such a difference to hear the birds and be outside. So that's my method.
pen and paper first, and then for the reasons that Marge cited, that I need that connection, and then to the computer, especially for longer work. Handwriting a novel is not something I want to do, so.
Thank you. That was very interesting because they say that cognitively in your brain, what comes out, like Marge said, and to spit it out on the keyboard are
Yeah.
completely different connections in your brain. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Well, you guys must have answered all of them. That's wonderful. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this Ames reading today. And my heartfelt thanks to you Prairie Trout Rider women for coming, and this has just been a wonderful experience. So thanks again. Karen, Pam, Marge, Twyla, and Mary.